Okay, here we go. Stand by. 3, 2, 1.
The thinking atheist. It's not a person. It's a symbol. An idea.
The population of atheists in this country is going through the roof.
Rejecting faith. Pursuing knowledge. Challenging the sacred.
If I tell the truth, it's because I tell the truth. Not because I put my hand on a book and made a wish.
And working together for a more rational world.
Take the risk of thinking for yourself. Much more happiness, truth, beauty, and wisdom will come to you that way.
Assume nothing. Question everything. And start thinking. This is the Thinking Atheist Podcast. Hosted by Seth Andrews.
On the show today, I'm going to be speaking with 3 people who escaped MAGA. They voted for Trump, they supported MAGA, they identified with the Make America Great Again movement, and now they're out and they're kind of blowing the whistle and they're talking about why they were wrong, what they were thinking, and how we might be able to approach some of these people if we want to go there. And so I'm interested, Stephen Hassan is a cult expert. He's an ex-Moonie. He wrote a whole book called The Cult of Trump, and I think it's straight up a cult. It's the identity of the group and the leader. It's an authoritarian model. I will take care of you and I will solve all your problems and distrust everybody else. So it's an information silo and you live in an alternate reality and you're spending all your money and your time and your resources to support the great leader. I mean, that's just straight up cult. But I'm going to talk to some ex-MAGAs on the show today. Now, you may hear in my voice, it's a little bit raspy. Natalie got sick 3 days ago. And when you share a house and oxygen with someone, there's a fair chance that you're going to get sick as well. And so yesterday, oh joy, now I've got the symptoms that she had. I feel okay, but my voice is a little scratchy and a tad sketchy. Just bear with me, okay? I'm going to do my best for you. Before I get to my calls, let me share an article that was published in the Daily Beast a while back. It's titled, January 6th Convict Tells the Truth About Trump. He's a cult boss. The article says this, actual truth has erupted on Truth Social. It came on Monday, and again, this was last year, after Donald Trump posted a compound falsehood. He posted, American justice, 69-year-old grandma with cancer given more prison time for walking inside U.S. Capitol than Hunter Biden for sharing classified documents with foreign regimes and multi-million-dollar bribery schemes. Trump endorsed the lies with one word, horrible. But then that same grandma with cancer, who is actually 70, came right at him and she posted, please don't be using me for anything. I'm not a victim of January 6th. I pleaded guilty because I was guilty. Hashtag stop the spin, Pamela Hemphill of Idaho wrote on the platform. She added that Trump should not compare her to the current president's son. He didn't try to attack the Capitol, she tweeted. Hemphill says that until 3 months ago, she was under the spell of what she calls the Trump cult. She attended the January 6th rally as a self-appointed citizen journalist and videographer after her brother gave her a plane ticket to Washington. He was trying to lift her spirits as she fought breast cancer. She said, my brother calls, says, hey, you, since you're going to start chemotherapy, why don't you go see Trump and video record that? I said I couldn't afford it, but he said, I'll give it to you for a Christmas present. 3 days after Christmas, Hemphill announced on Facebook she was going to Washington. It's not going to be a fun Trump rally that is planned for January 6th, she said. It's a war, and war is in all caps. She added, the fight for America is real. Show up. I don't need to hear your excuses. We have no second chances. If millions, and I mean millions, show up, we may have a chance. Find a way. That New Year's Eve, a friend posted on Facebook what Hemphill says was just a joke photo of her holding a plastic rifle. Happy New Year on my way to Washington January 6th, the caption read. Hemphill later said she had not realized how lost she had become. She said, you don't see it as a cult when you're in it. You don't recognize it. She said she still had 40 stitches from her breast surgery when she was caught up in the rush into the Capitol building. She credits one of the cops with saving her from serious injury. A combination of excitement and pain medication caused her to then urge the crowd to go on in, she said. This is your house, she can be heard saying on her own video. The next morning, she flew back to Boise. She was home 8 months later when FBI agents arrived at her door and arrested her. They were nothing like the jackbooted feds of far-right fictions. She said, the FBI were really good to me. They just have procedures. It's what they do. The agents agreed to let her just sit down and collect herself. I said, I got a vape for a minute here. I'm nervous. I've never been in jail in my life. After Hemphill pleaded guilty to invading the Capitol, she was sentenced to 60 days in prison. In mid-July of last year, she paid 2 months' rent in advance and surrendered at the federal prison in Dublin, California. Hemphill says the 60 days felt like an eternity. She said she had deepening doubts that the election had really been stolen. She said, I was starting to see things. I was back and forth not knowing what to believe. But Trumpism kept its hold on her until she was back home, and family members began speaking hard truth to her, just as she had to alcoholics and drug abusers before she retired as a substance abuse counselor. She recalled, they told me, Pam, you're in a cult. You really need to get out of that. We really care about you, but this is a cult. You're trapped in a cult. She began to see the Trump who had been there all along. She recalled, I started seeing the narcissistic behavior, and I said, wait, this is gaslighting. This is not true. She began to listen to what her gut had been telling her. I never liked how he talked to people anyway, she said. He's rude. He's very mean to people. She discerned the truth about fake news. She said, tell everybody it's fake news, and they don't listen to that news. She became angry when Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene out of Georgia and others spoke of her as a victim. She said, what's happened is they're using me like a victim. I'm not a victim. I pleaded guilty because I was guilty, period. I mean, I was trespassing. I had a choice. I could have left. And she was disturbed by the ongoing Trump mania. All those flags with his picture on it and T-shirts, she said. It's like, wait, you guys, this is getting a little weird. In the meantime, other January 6th participants and their supporters were bombarding Hemphill with texts and tweets. She recalled they were just telling me all their victimness, gaslighting, and I started saying, wait. You guys, the officers were nice to me. I don't see what you're talking about. I started hearing all their lies, their stories. I said, wait, it doesn't look like the police started anything. In April of 2023, Hemphill finally broke the spell. She told herself what her family had been telling her. I said, this is it, Pam. This is a cult. Just face it. Back away, 100%. Those still deep in the cult were furious. She said, I started debunking them and they got mad at me and they started getting more mad at me and started a smear campaign on me that I was a Fed agent, that I was Antifa. Just silly children, high school stuff. She was exiled from January 6 Twitter spaces. She started one of her own that filled with people who wielded the best weapon against a cult. Facts, she said. She came to understand how she and others became members of the Trump cult. She said it's called love bombing. He's a rescuer trying to save the world, you know. On Monday, Hemphill responded to Trump with facts on Truth Social, and it was not because she favors any of the other presidential candidates. Too bad we don't have a black woman running, she said. And again, this was before Kamala Harris. Over the last 15 years, we've talked a lot with people who have escaped cults and have insider knowledge, and cults can exist far beyond religions. Yes, there can be political cults. And there are others, like the wellness industry cults. You'll find some kind of hardcore people there. It's just one of those things that applies in so many ways. And I'm interested in the stories of people who were there and got out, and we're going to talk to them today. I've got Jeff on the line. Jeff, are you there?
I'm here.
Tell me about yourself. I guess we start with your background. What were the precursors to MAGA for you?
Well, I go back a long way. I first started voting for Ronald Reagan back in 1980 because I was kind of taken in by his charisma, if you want to call it that. And I thought he seemed like a really good person, a good-hearted person. And I still believe that, but I think he was very misguided on economics. But I come from, I wasn't born a Republican, but I come from a Republican family. So it's just one of those natural things that it seems like, well, everybody in my family is a Republican, so I must be too.
I was a Reagan guy. I mean, I was relatively young. Let's see, I graduated high school in 1986, but I was part of that. He was polished and he was smooth and he was, Hollywood. So he knew how to string sentences together and be charismatic and all the catchwords. Freedom, American exceptionalism. And it was only afterwards when I looked back and saw things like the AIDS crisis and his abysmal handling of it and the debt and the greedy 80s that I really looked through the looking glass the other way. Was that you?
Absolutely. And what I was just thinking is I saw all of those things and I didn't like them, and yet I was able to overlook them. And I'm almost embarrassed to say that, but I saw the flaws and I just ignored them.
Okay, well, tell me about your mindset in 2016, pre-election. Donald Trump is running. He's supposedly the outsider, beholden to no one, and he's going to come and just fix it. He's going to be the hero that saves us all. Were you thinking that?
I don't know if I would go that far, but by 2016, I was already starting to kind of doubt my mindset. I have a lot of friends who lean very far left, and they were very good as far as we had a lot of conversations. And there was never any, no harsh words or anything, but they were really beginning to win me over. But the problem I had at that time, and I'm embarrassed to say this too, I did not like Hillary because I blamed Benghazi on her. And I don't even know if that's correct or not, but I had been, for many years, I listened to Rush Limbaugh and Sean Hannity and Glenn Beck and all of those nuts. And I think I was buying a lot of things that they were saying. So by the time the election came around, and again, I hate to admit this, but I ended up voting for Trump in 2016. And I regret it a lot, but almost immediately I realized that was a very bad move.
I'm going to back up. I was in radio. This was 1994, 95. I would work the morning show. And then by the time I was ready to drive home, Rush Limbaugh and his monologue would come on the radio. So it was like 1 o'clock. And I remember I would be calm at the beginning of the drive. And by the time I got home, after 15, 17 minutes of him getting worked up and me getting worked up, I thought, this whole country's going to hell in a handbasket. Were you that way? Did he ramp you up?
Absolutely. I can remember at one point in time thinking that, what is wrong with these liberals? Can they not see the light? It's so obvious.
I like what you said about how your liberal friends didn't treat you like a Nazi. And in the age of the internet, we're seeing the death of discourse, and people say, well, we can disagree on what kind of coffee we like and our favorite color and whether we're dog people or cat people, but we can't disagree on our values. And on the surface, I totally get that. I really understand. But it's a conversation stopper. I mean, do we want to change minds? So when you were MAGA before Trump, you weren't an evil person, right?
Yes, I would go along with that, right.
You loved your family. You wanted everybody to win. You weren't a bigot. I mean, I'm projecting here, but I'm looking for you to validate. You were a person who genuinely wanted good things.
Yeah, I feel like I've always kind of rooted for the underdog, and there's never been any kind of group of people that I hated or even disliked. I'm very sociable and enjoy everyone's company, and If I remember correctly, I think it was Will Rogers that said, "I never met a man I couldn't learn something from."
Were you a Christian, and did Christianity inform your political viewpoint?
Well, I was. I grew up, again, as much as a Republican household in a Christian or Baptist household. And I don't know if that had a strong influence other than the fact that virtually everyone I knew at that time in that religion, they were also conservative Republicans. So I don't know why, but they do tend to coalesce, don't they?
Who was it who was talking about how travel is one of the best cures for bigotry? And I think this can be true when traveling out of our own circle. If we're always looking at people from a distance, the different, from a distance, it's a whole lot easier to be bigoted against them, isn't it?
That's absolutely true.
When you look at MAGA now, Christians who are supporting a person who is the antithesis of the best teachings of Christ and what looks to be just a day-by-day cognitive decline, the culture of cruelty, when you look at all this and you see his supporters and the fact that it's even a race, do you have opinions about this when you're sitting over coffee with your people? What kind of things are you saying?
Yeah, it's surreal. When I look at the situation, it boggles my mind. I cannot understand how people can put those things together. They can look at this con man, convicted criminal, and think he's some kind of God-fearing man.
I will make a confession to you, Jeff. I can usually find one redeeming quality in someone. They love their children or something. I mean, if I'm really stretching, I look at Donald Trump and I got nothing. I cannot fight. Is he kind? No. Is he smart? No. Does he have a charitable heart? No. Does he seem to genuinely love his wife and children and honor that relationship? And how does he speak about them in public? I mean, over and over. And I can't find anything, Jeff. Am I a bad person?
No, I can't. I can't think of like you. I cannot find a single redeeming quality with that man.
Well, do you have any other observations? Having that look inside the culture, are there any other observations? Like, I'm hoping that our callers can maybe teach us about the mindset, get us in the machine, let us see the gears turning. Can you help us out?
The only thing that I would maybe add is that having been on both sides of this fence, I think it helps open your minds a little bit. And I think that I don't think I would obviously feel the same way if I'd been on the left side the whole time. But having been on the other side, I can see this from both points of view. And that's one of the reasons that I think the more people, the more conservatives that we can have these good conversations with, if they can open their minds and step back and look at this thing without the blinders on, I think they're going to have a whole new perspective like I did.
Do you have an opinion about strategy?
All of my tactics up to this point have not worked very well because it seems like I've never met a group of people that seems to, I hate to generalize, but they seem to have their heels dug in so firmly. The Republican Party today is just not what it used to be. In fact, as far as I'm concerned, it doesn't exist anymore. It's now the MAGA party, the party of Trump, because his followers are loyal to him, not the country or the Constitution. And in my opinion, that makes it more of a cult of personality. And the people who are in a cult, they're the last ones to know they're in a cult. If you look at Heaven's Gate, Branch Davidians in Waco, People's Temple in Jonestown, none of those people would admit or even realize they were in a cult. They would follow their leader to the gates of hell. And MAGA really now is no different. In fact, January 6th, I think, is a perfect example of that. I think it checks all the boxes of being a cult. The leader is always right. Criticism of the leader is persecution. Regardless of how harmful it is, the leader's behavior is always justified, and the leader has the exclusive franchise to the truth. So I think the only way out of a cult is to recognize that you're in one. I'm glad I did.
Well, you are proof that somebody can be extricated, that people can reason their way. There's a saying out there that says that you can't reason someone out of something they never reasoned themselves into in the first place. I think that's crap. I think you reasoned your way out, right?
Yes, that's true. That is true.
Jeff, you are much appreciated. Thanks for giving us a few minutes of your insight into MAGA culture. I'm glad you escaped, and I appreciate you listening and participating, man.
Thank you for having me.
Two more perspectives in just a second. I've got Jessica. She said she was pretty much motivated by fear and an analytical mind who managed to reason his way out. How did that happen? We've got more next. A little patriotic music as we talk about ex-MAGAs on the broadcast. All right, enough of that bullshit. I do not go in for that. The horns and everybody stands up with hand over heart. It just feels so manufactured to me. It's sort of this cheaply bought patriotism that just feels fake. Anyway, sorry about that. Continuing with my raspy voice, a conversation about former MAGAs. Jessica, you with me?
Yeah.
You were a Make America Great Trump voting, I don't know, describe yourself instead of me sort of grasping at it. What were you like?
Oh, unfortunately, I was a Make America Great Again Trump supporter for a few years. I was raised in a Mormon, pretty Christian nationalist conservative household, and that just stuck with me. Sorry, that is my kid.
That's okay, no problem. I mean, she can join the call. It's all good.
And I was raised to be afraid of socialism, which is any government program that conservatives don't like, and to be afraid of gun control, and be afraid of abortion, and be afraid of the rise of secularism. For me, being a Trump supporter was really a fear response. Mormonism is interesting because Christian nationalism is really baked into the doctrine of Mormonism. In the Book of Mormon, it actually says that if the people in America stop worshiping God, then they will be swept off the face of the earth. So that was just an added level of fear.
And you draw a circle around something I find interesting. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Mormons are pretty cool with Christians, like we're all in the same club, where Christians consider Mormonism a false faith. Am I close?
Yes. Oh, it drives us crazy. Because Mormons do believe in Jesus. They just believe that all the other Christian faiths have lost truth over the last 2,000 years, and that Joseph Smith had to bring some of that truth back through the Book of Mormon, through the Doctrine and Covenants, other revelations. And so Christians totally consider themselves Mormon. And then, sorry, I'm mixing up my words. Mormons totally consider themselves Christians, but other Christians are like, what's with this Joseph Smith? Stop it. You guys aren't real Christians.
The Mormon faith is an authoritarian culture, male-dominated. So here comes a dominant male, right? An alpha male type, Donald Trump. Was that part of the reason you responded?
I'm sure that probably had something to do with it. It would have been more of a subconscious thing. For me, I knew that Donald Trump wasn't a good person. I knew that he was a jerk. My parents actually never voted for him because they could see through him. But I went with him because I thought he was sticking it to the libs sort of thing. I thought it was a good thing that he was being loud and obnoxious and not politically correct. And so I didn't really care that he was a bad person until January 6th, when I realized how bad of a person he was.
Well, hang on. Help me understand that. Was it that he was a jerk just to the people you didn't like? So, hey, you got to break some eggs if you want an omelet, and he's hating on the right people kind of thing? Yeah,
I'd say that. I thought that the liberals, the leftists, the trans people, the atheists, they deserved to be hated on because they were ruining the country.
So if you had met me on the streets, I would have been like the evil enemy.
I mean, I would have been nice. In fact, I served a Mormon mission, and I met atheists and stuff, and I'd try to be like, oh, really? Oh, why don't you want to have God in your lives, sort of thing. So I wouldn't have been one of the Trump supporters who would have gone and up and yelled in your face or anything. I just thought you were wrong.
It's funny, when I was in the faith, I knew Evolution was wrong, but I'd never taken an evolutionary biology class. I knew socialism is wrong, but I couldn't define it, communism, etc. And I'm not saying I'm an advocate. I'm just saying I was an opponent and ignorant. Like, I don't know what it is, but I know it's crap. Were you the same way?
I actually did believe in evolution, which is kind of funny. Mormons they try to say science can fit in with our religion, even though it can't really. And so in Mormonism, it's okay to believe in evolution. It's okay to believe in an old earth. So I believed in evolution, but I also believed that God just created humans and maybe he did it through evolution. For socialism, I didn't really know what socialism was. I basically thought it was taxes that I didn't like.
Socialism is Russia. They want to make us the Soviet Union, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So January 6th, all of a sudden things started to shake. What happened?
On January 6th, you wake up to the news that the Capitol has been stormed and stuff. And I'm like, oh, these stupid people, why would they do that? They're making conservatives look bad. I was so mad. And Donald Trump just started saying the election's been stolen and we can't let this happen. And I realized that he wasn't pro-democracy. And so I'd realized that he was a jerk before and that I realized he wasn't a great person, but I thought he was the man for the job. But then when he went after actual freedoms and democracy, I was like, okay, I was wrong about him. I need to rethink this. So I did. And I was still conservative for a while after that. I just wasn't supporting Trump after that.
So what year are we talking about?
January 6, 2021. By the end of 2021, I was shifting more progressive. So it kind of took that whole year to think things through.
Did that affect your relationships?
My family and friends no one's cut me off or anything. There are some people who I have a harder time talking to now, but I haven't actually lost any friends or family over this, which I know I'm very privileged in that regard. I'm a full-blown liberal atheist now. I left Mormonism as well. And people still talk to me, so that's great.
So that's a parallel track, right? You deconstructed Mormonism and you were deconstructing Trump cult at the same time?
Yeah, two cults at the same time, baby.
I mean, that wants your autograph. That's remarkable.
Well, thank you.
Did this result in any identity problems? Who am I after all this time, this sea change in my life? What are my values? I mean, did you have to go out of MAGA? Did you have to go issue by issue and sort of reintroduce yourself to the things that matter?
The biggest identity crisis for me was leaving Mormonism. Conservatism, that wasn't that big of a deal for me to change politically, but leaving Mormonism after 25 years was insane. It was so hard. And I'm sure you know what that's like, leaving Christianity. It's like your entire identity is gone.
What do you think people get wrong about MAGA? Those of us on the outside looking in, and I don't know if I'd have been one when I was a conservative, but I was a Ronald Reagan, Rush Limbaugh kind of guy, So I don't know. What do you think we on the outside may need to know about the culture that we get wrong? You have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. So Trump is mean, and some of his followers are mean, but I think most of them aren't mean. They're just scared. And they see their way of life being challenged as we get more progressive and as science shows us things that we didn't think before. I think most people who support Trump aren't actually jerks. It's one thing I'd say. And it is a lot about fear, and also just they're very sheltered. They just don't know any trans people or even any atheists. They just maybe haven't met very many minorities. And so it's hard to try to get along with them, but also like it's hard. Because I look back on myself and I thought that I was a nice person. I thought that I was a good person. But then I look back at myself and I'm like, oh my God, I was a jerk. How could I think that way?
Let's talk about patriotism, love of country. That's a different word when you're in MAGA and when you're out. I'm not opposed to love of country, patriotism in its purest form. I have a problem with jingoism and blind nationalism, but love of country. Has your perception on that word patriotism changed?
It has. I actually have a really hard time now with like the national anthem at sporting events and stuff, just because when I used to sing the national anthem, I'm actually a vocalist, so I would sing it for sport events and other things. When I used to do that, I was like, America is the best, and, you know, God, and all and country and all this stuff. And now when I listen to it sung, I'm cringing inside, and I don't want to be that way because I do love my country, but it reminds me of who I used to be. I really appreciate that the Harris Walls ticket and all their conventions and stuff, that they're like incorporating patriotism into it, to be like, hey, Democrats, undecided, we love our country too, you know. Trump and his people don't have a monopoly on that.
Martin Luther King Jr. had vehement criticisms about this country, racial inequities and oppression, etc. And some would argue, and I would include myself, that he was one of the greatest patriots, right? If you truly love your country, you want it to achieve the best version of itself.
Definitely.
Jessica, it's interesting, too, that years ago when I saw an American flag, like my perception of it has changed because I've seen it sort of weaponized. Like if 15 years ago I'd have seen somebody who had a car antenna and had a little flag on it, I'd be like, oh, okay, that's nice. And now when I see one, I start to immediately make assumptions about that person, like who they are and what their position is on Trump and whether or not they're pro-gun or nationalized health care and how they feel about foreign policy and Israel. And I start to just add all that. I feel like our perception of the American flag has totally been kind of perverted is the word. I don't know. Do you relate to that at all?
Yeah, I see what you're saying there. I think it's the same thing for me. If I see someone driving down the road with a flag on their truck, then I definitely think that they probably support certain things and think a certain way. And that makes me sad that I think that, but it's just kind of how it is.
Well, how you doing these days? You're on the other side. Where you at?
I'm doing really well. It took about 2 years of political and especially religious deconstruction to kind of get out of the cave, I guess, into the light, if I can wax metaphorical. But I'm doing really well. I'm happy with where I'm at. I still feel like I'm lacking some community in the fact that I don't go to church anymore. So, like, if I went, they would all be like, hi, how are you? Oh, so good to see you, Jessica. You know, they wouldn't be mean, but I don't want to go to church, and so I never see them. But I just have such a love for everyone now, more so than I did as a Christian. You know, Jesus says to love everyone. But when you have this feeling of, oh, but they're trans, oh, but they're gay, oh, but they're not a Christian or a Mormon like me, that gets in the way. And now I can just love people as people. And I really appreciate that.
You're amazing. I so appreciate this sort of inside out look, Jessica. Thanks for reaching out and sort of volunteering your time. And I hear your baby girl in the background, so go take care of your child. And thanks for talking to us.
Yeah, thank you.
Still to come, I've got a guy named Ethan who has an interesting take on how conspiracy theories tie into MAGA thinking. We'll talk to him next. I am talking on the show today to people who were once in Trump cult. They were MAGAs, but they are MAGAs no more. I've got Ethan on the line. Ethan, are you there?
Yep, I'm here. How's it going for you?
I'm good. We're talking MAGA and ex-MAGA. and you reached out and said you might have a story for us. So I guess I'll start you back at square one.
So to give a little bit of background on the MAGA stuff, I'm only 26 years old, so this election that's coming up later this year, it's only the third election I've ever voted in, presidential election if we're going by that. First one I voted in was back in 2016, so I voted for Trump in that one, and then I voted Republican in the midterms in 2018, and I graduated college in 2020, and so I had a lot more free time on my hands. I was pretty bogged down in college. I didn't have time to really research and look into politics for myself. So as soon as I graduated in 2020, I had all that free time to really, break away from what my family was telling me. In college and before that, pretty much all my political information was getting funneled through my family and the people that they listened to. A lot of people like Glenn Beck, Mark Levin, Sean Hannity, all those conservative talk radio host figures. But as soon as I graduated college in 2020, I had so much more time to actually kind of dig into this stuff for myself. And I started to see that, the conservative Republican Party, it really didn't represent what my family was telling me that they represented. They would kind of go on and on about how much they're for freedom of speech and all that. And I started to find that, they're really more of a party about traditional speech than free speech. And so that made me step back. I went neutral, and so I did not vote in the election that year. A couple years later, as I dug into it more, and I'm going to just gloss over this part, but then backtrack and go into more detail. Because the conclusion of this is that, by 2022, after I had really dug into both sides, both conservative and liberal, I voted liberal in the 2022 midterms. Of course, I'm planning to vote for Harris.
Well, if I can, I want to get in your head back before. Can you describe yourself back then? What were you thinking? What were you like?
Yeah, so ironically, it's actually good that you are backtracking to that, because that also ties into the wider web that I'm kind of seeing connected to Trumpism specifically. So I was born with some sort of unknown condition. I'm not sure what it is. I've talked to doctors about it. It's not schizophrenia. It's not anything schizotypal, but basically just to give a brief explanation for it, I do have all sorts of strange and bizarre, abnormal sensory experiences and stuff like that. Basically, where if I was less skeptical, I would be calling them paranormal experiences. So the point in me bringing that up is I was a very spiritual kid. I had all these experiences and believed in all this spiritual stuff, even up to the age of maybe around 21, 22. I can't remember exactly, but that was pretty much my entire life and definitely my entire childhood. And my family is largely spiritual as well. So it wasn't just the Glenn Beck and the Rush Limbaugh, the Sean Hannity, the Mark Levin. Certainly those types of figures were there, but there was also this wider net of information or misinformation that we were really into. So Coast to Coast AM, which would usually come on after Mark Levin, same channel from what I remember listening to it when I was maybe 11 years old.
Yeah, but if I may, Coast to Coast was wacky. That was Art Bell. They were talking about aliens and UFOs and the Illuminati and stuff like that. You were into that?
Oh, yeah. And we were definitely into all that. Those were my beliefs as well. So my family, my parents believed in all that stuff. The reptilians, there being bases on the far side of the moon, the whole shebang, the entire, take the conspiracy theories all the way out to the edge. And that's where we were, and that's where I was back when I was a kid, and not even just a kid, like I was saying, up to, again, I can't remember the exact age, but only a few years ago, early 20s. And then I kind of deconstructed myself out of it. So, really back then, my whole mindset was not just a conservative one. It was really, I was living in this world where there was all this stuff around every corner. There were aliens walking among us. There was a global elite controlling the world. And given my condition that I was born with, these sorts of quote-unquote paranormal experiences that I had, in my mind and in my parents' mind, this was a gift, right? This was something that was given to me. I was born with it, and I had to be careful with this information that I was getting from my experiences. And if I wasn't careful, there was like this government that would lock me away or do this or that. Now you start to think of like Andrew Tate and all those guys, like the Matrix. There's like this this ruling elite out there where if you share too much of the quote unquote truth, somebody out there, they're going to be watching you and they're going to take you down. That was kind of the whole mentality that I grew up in, and my family still holds to that mentality. So in a very, very simplified way, that would be my answer as to what the mindset was. But there's definitely a lot more depth to it. I could just go on and on and on about.
So, would I call this QAnon? Were you a Q?
I was not a Q, but I was further than that. I was probably more extreme than that. Not in the sense that I wanted to do harm, like what I at least hear about from a lot of the Q drops. It seems like they're actually wanting to engage in more like physical action, violence and stuff like that. So I never had that mindset. But in terms of just the pure ideology, yeah, my ideas, my beliefs, they were definitely a lot crazier than Q. If I had known about QAnon when I was a kid, I would have read those and been like, okay, yeah, old news. That's a regular Tuesday to me. It's nothing weird. It's nothing bizarre. My ideas were far more bizarre than that.
Ethan, were you a religious person?
I would somewhat describe myself as religious. Really, the term I used was spiritual. Typically, when I use the term religious, I kind of define that as more doctrinal, like they adhere to a specific doctrine, the Bible, the Quran, the Torah, so on and so forth. Spiritual, as I use the term, it's more not doctrinal, but more like personal. You see everything in the universe as being some sort of personified thing. So you look at a tree, and there's a spirit in that tree. There's a life force in the tree, kind of manifesting the tree. Or you look at the earth, there's an earth spirit. Or you look at the stars, every star has a life force or this or that. So you kind of over personify everything. So it's more personal.
Did you admire, even worship Donald Trump?
No, ironically, I never got that far. I'm not quite sure why. Maybe ironically, that was that was only one benefit of the fact that I went so far out with conspiratorial and spiritual thinking that I was just way too out there to see Donald Trump as anything significant. Like, he didn't really look like a big blip on the radar to me. It was just like he was just one small figure in this entire vast universe of all this wacky stuff going on. And so I never really saw a reason to worship that or even praise that. In my mind, I just saw him as like, okay, we need to vote for him so that we can have freedom and that the quote-unquote truth can get out and it's not going to be demonized. Because, again, going back to my whole childhood mindset and my family mindset, that was the big thing. There's this global elite, and if people like me aren't careful, we're going to speak the quote-unquote truth, and we're going to get arrested for it. We're going to get tortured for it. We're going to get killed for it. And so in my mind, Trump was a necessary stepping stone to getting us out of that world.
Ethan, if I was to ask you at the age of 18, 16, I don't care, to describe the libs, a liberal, what was your perception?
I would say they're deeply corrupt in that they're very biased. They don't care about freedom of speech, and they're not as accepting as the Republicans. So I would describe Republicans and conservatives as being more open to different viewpoints. And then I would say that liberals are the opposite, that they're intolerant. They want to shut down opposing viewpoints, especially if those viewpoints are very controversial or if they are seeking a harsh truth. They wouldn't be so willing to engage in that harshness, even if it is the truth. That was kind of my general thinking about them back then.
Did you buy into the one world government? The liberals want to dismantle the United States for a sort of a global cabal thing.
I had a very interesting relationship with that idea because that was one where, for some reason, my parents saw it as more of a problem than me. So here's the difference. With my parents, they saw the one world government as an inherently problematic idea. meaning whether it was a one world government with corrupt leaders or with benevolent leaders, they just thought like the entire model was corrupt, that there was no way that any type of one world government would ever be a good model. You know, even things like the United Nations are not necessarily good. In my mind, though, even as a kid, I saw the whole one world government conspiracy as bad in the sense that, okay, we would have these corrupt elites ruling over us, ruling over every nation, dictating what everybody in every nation should do. And so in my mind, that was bad, but I never really had any animosity towards the notion of a unified world government in general. I thought that that could be good, whereas my family thought, no, it's just 100% bad through and through. You got to throw it away. It'd be a new world order no matter which direction we go with it. So the whole idea has just got to be thrown out.
Ethan, do you want to tell me how the dominoes started to fall for you?
So basically, I started looking back and analyzing all my ideas and trying to think, okay, looking at each one individually, can this simply be told, or can I actually show something for it, whether empirically or even just intangibly? So you think like in a math class, you know, you don't have empirical demonstrations. It's like the professor just asks you, can you go up to the board and demonstrate to us that this formula works or this equation works? So there is such a thing as intangible demonstrations as well. And so I was kind of just going back through all my ideas and asking myself, is there something to show for each of these, or can I just tell people about it? And I ended up throwing out a majority of my ideas because they could only be told rather than shown in any sort of way. And I kept about like 5 categories of ideas where, yeah, I kind of looked at it and I could show something for it. And I sat back and looked at those 5 categories, and I saw that, okay, 3 of them are actually like my biggest categories of ideas, like the most quote unquote out there, or you call crazy or something like that. But when I would sit down and discuss these ideas with professors, you know, it was those 5 categories where they'd be like, yeah, no, those actually have some academic rigor. You can write papers about some of those ideas, or really even all of them. And yet 3 of those 5 that had some academic rigor, they were the 3 biggest. So I found out that evidence or having the capability to show something for your work, it does not discriminate against crazy ideas. It's not about which ideas are crazy. It's just about which ideas have something to show for themselves, something external to your claim.
I remember when I was in the faith and we would posit something that they thought sounded insane, they would call us crazy, but we thought that was a feature, not a bug, right? I think, I heard a scientist say once that the mindset is, you know, they said Albert Einstein was crazy. They call me crazy, so I'm like Einstein, right?
Right, and I love that idea, too, because my parents will often bring that one up, that, look, guys like Einstein were called crazy, and they proved everybody wrong. And I said, but back up, wait a minute, 99 out of 100 people, if you count Einstein in that 100, 99 of those people, yeah, they had crazy ideas like Einstein, but they had nothing to show for those ideas. The reason why Einstein was both crazy and right is because he was the one guy out of the analogous 100 who had something to show for his craziness. It wasn't just him being crazy, it was the universe being crazy, right? The universe backed him up, right?
I find it interesting what I had expected, and I think it all ties together when we talk about Make America Great Again, the Trump cult or culture, but conspiracy theories, end of the world type stuff, the Illuminati, the deep states, they're coming for your children, they're drinking the blood of babies and those types of things. It all ties into the culture. So as you escaped, you weren't necessarily a worshiper of Donald Trump. You found it was more of a transactional thing. Like, if I'm going to get the country that's more free, he's the option. That's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, it is transactional. That's certainly what drove my election for Trump in 2016, is that, yeah, in my mind and in my parents' mind, you know, I have these ideas. I was this quote-unquote gift, and I had to be careful that I didn't elect somebody who would do away with me in whatever sense they would choose to. And he would keep the country safe, and he would make sure that doesn't happen, and not just that it wouldn't happen to me, but that it wouldn't happen to other people out there. They wouldn't get innocently condemned or anything like that. So yeah, in that sense, it was very much transactional. But then the second comment that I wanted to add Also goes back to the common sense thing. And this is another thing that I've noticed, which is really big in the MAGA culture. And so this kind of tackles the heart of your question here, which is I've noticed that pretty much every person I've talked to who is in MAGA, it's rare that I'll talk to a group of people and get a 100% consistency on something because, of course, people are so varied. But somehow with this, I have noticed, at least anecdotally, a 100% consistency in that every MAGA person I've talked to thinks that common sense equals evidence. They think that validity equals evidence, and they don't understand the difference between an idea being valid and an idea being evidential. And if you don't mind, real quick, could I use like an example that I typically like to use to highlight what that difference exactly means and why it's so problematic with MAGA thinking?
Yeah, please do.
Okay, we learn in middle school that the reason that the sky is warm colored at sunrise or sunset is because longer wavelengths of light, like red and orange light, they don't scatter in the atmosphere as easily as cooler colors of light do. So now that the light's coming in on a longer angle, at sunrise or sunset, it's only the longer wavelengths of light that are really going to be able to make it through all of that atmosphere. And so we see the reds and the oranges and the yellows more. Now, given that, so we know that that's true, but here's where this gets kind of funny, is I could make an argument that therefore, if all that light is having to go through more and more atmosphere, then what if we say that the light's getting refracted, like a straw in a glass? You see the straw, it looks bent, and that refraction gets exponentially more severe as the sun goes down at sunset more, or, if it's earlier at sunrise. The refraction gets deeper and deeper until eventually you could say the angle of the sunlight is so refracted that it looks like the sun is gone. It looks like it's beneath the horizon, but it's not. It's still up there, and so nighttime's an illusion. And so, look, I've just come up with a model or an argument that basically argues for flat Earth, that nighttime's an illusion, that the sun is actually still up above, but we don't see it up above at nighttime because the light's just getting refracted by this middle school fact that we all learn. And there's no contradictions in what I just said. There's no identity breaks or inconsistencies in what I said. It's a very valid model. There's nothing logically wrong with it. But the reason why the model is still wrong is because validity is not enough. You have to have something to show for the idea. It's not enough to just come up with an argument that has airtight logic and it's valid and it's uncontradictory and it's consistent. Like, that's not good enough, because if you think that's good enough, you could become a flat earther. So flat earthers are not stupid people. They're people coming up with all sorts of valid models, and they don't see the difference between validity and evidence. So now to tie this to MAGA, I found that 100% of the time, all the people I've talked to, anecdotally in MAGA, they're the same exact way. They come up with all these valid models, this logical reasoning. They can give you an argument and a narrative which has no contradictions, no inconsistencies. And so they're like, look, there it is. There's nothing illogical about what I just said. There's nothing wrong with the narrative I just gave you about whether it be the Trump assassination or trans people in schools or any of that. They can give you a perfectly consistent narrative, and they think that the consistency and the validity is enough. They think that common sense is enough, that an idea making sense is enough, because they don't realize that evidence is validity plus more. It's not just validity. I really think that's an important distinction that people need to learn. I think maybe that's one failure of our education system, is that we never learned that difference between validity and evidence, and that was the big difference and distinction that made all the dominoes fall for me, so to speak. That, it does not matter how much something makes sense. It matters how much there is to be shown, and things can be shown for boring ideas. They can be shown for crazy ideas and big ideas too. It doesn't matter. Just bring something to the table to show people what you're saying instead of just claiming it. And I think we need to somehow build that into our education system. I don't know what that's going to look like. I think if we can somehow build that question and all the surrounding questions into our education system, I don't know, maybe that'd be one way to really decrease the spread of misinformation in our society, because I really think this whole MAGA movement is just one circle of misinformation among many, many, many others that I've seen connected through this web. And the main thing connecting the entire web of misinformation is this fact that all the people in these circles and in this web, they think validity is enough, and they need to learn that it just isn't.
My subjective take is that I'm hearing you speak, and I hear an analytical mind. And then when I see, the Daily Show go out and interview people at Trump rallies, I am not hearing analytical minds. So that, you may have had a leg up. But I'm so thankful for you and your perspective. You've got a lot of good stuff to say, a window into Trump support, MAGA culture, and I think a lot of really good information about how that thinking works. Ethan, you're much appreciated.
Thank you. I definitely appreciate the convo.
That is about all I can swing. I'm going to go and hit some cold medicine and put a dog in my lap and catch some Z's. Ghost Stories is next week. I should be 100% for that. Going to be a lot of fun as we get into the October Halloween spirit. Thanks to my callers. Thanks for listening. I'll catch you later.
Follow The Thinking Atheist on Facebook and Twitter for a complete archive of podcasts and videos, products like mugs and t-shirts featuring the Thinking Atheist logo, links to atheist pages and resources, and details on upcoming free thought events and conventions. Log on to our website, thethinkingatheist.com.